Welcome to the Enchanted Earth Podcast, where you will hear stories of nature with the power to transform our lives. These sacred stories are begging to be shared now. So listen in as my guest today shares one of their own. So welcome, everybody. Today we have with us Janine de Waal, and let me tell you a little bit about Janine. She's an international design architect and heritage practitioner whose work spans architecture, art, education, and curated cultural travel. Through her studio, she weaves together planet, people, and place, creating meaningful experiences and work that honors the past, inspires the present, and supports the future. So welcome, Janine.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you for having me. It's really super.
Well, I was very interested in having you because, you are the first person I'm interviewing from, or actually on, the planet of Africa. So the planet.
Sometimes it does feel like a whole separate universe.
Yeah.
But at least you know we're not a country. So that's one step in the right direction.
Okay. All right. Can you just share a little bit about that experience growing up there and being of that land?
Yes, I mean, it's pretty special. I live on the tip of Africa, so based in South Africa, born in South Africa, traveled to Namibia before it got independence and afterwards and so on. And there's definitely for me an energy, and it feels like South Africa, Southern Africa is my soul home. And I've kind of traveled because I think instinctively after studying, I better get out of South Africa. It's on the tip of Africa. There's so much to see. One kind of, especially with a history, didn't really grow up fully integrated with the rest of the world and all of that. And there was like a sense of the rest of the world has more to offer. So it was very important for me to kind of spread my wings. As I finished university, before I even graduated, I had a job in Namibia, which was the neighboring country, but I'd already traveled to the UK and then subsequently Australia, the Bahamas, Europe, you name it. So it was kind of this urge to explore and not be tied down, but somehow knowing South Africa, Southern Africa is my soul home.
Wow. Yeah, I'm really interested in kind of unpacking that as we talk through this conversation here. First, can you tell us a little bit about the land and your childhood and how the sense of awe and wonder kind of made itself known to you as a child?
So I think for me, my first memories, we stayed in a small town, basically on the other side of quite a big mountain range from Cape Town. So there was always the sense of traveling over the mountains to get to the bigger city. And we were always just on the other side of the mountains. My grandparents lived closer to Cape Town. So it was always this journey across the mountain pass. And then for me, my entire childhood, although we were always in urban environments, it was always accentuated by school holidays on the farm with my aunt and my uncle and my cousins, and then Christmas holidays at the beach, because obviously our Christmas holidays are in summer. And that was with my grandparents and all my aunts and uncles and cousins. So there was this sense of family, but as children, we were hardly ever indoors. We virtually only came home for food, and to sleep and to bath. And even like bathing every day was like, oh, we're going to miss out, because basically you woke up and you went outside into nature, whether it was on the farm, whether it was on the beach, in the sea. So there was just this constant connection to nature, and kind of houses and places of shelter were kind of secondary because you lived outdoors. So for me, I couldn't imagine a better childhood being so connected to the landscape. In different forms, some of it cultivated, some of it more wilderness, but a real sense of being of the land and part of the land and needing to work in the land.
I'm curious, is there a particular landscape that really draws you and your
So that's
imagination?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about that now for the last week and thinking about all my experiences in the landscape and especially Namibia. Namibia is it feels as though as you cross the border, there's like a spiritual veil that lifts. And there's just and I think it's got to do with the lack of people because the density is one person per square kilometer. So as you cross the border, the people just kind of disappear and it's just you're exposed to the landscape. And I've had amazing like desert experiences because I've never really been like a beach person. But the more I thought of it, it's a lot more subtle for me, my connection to landscape, than a single awe-inspiring experience. It's about the subconscious, it's about kind of that ever presence, those things that you're not fully consciously aware of, but when you're in an environment where they're not present, you immediately feel that loss. And that to me is what the Cape Town mountains are. So we kind of grew up, we moved shortly after staying in that small rural area to closer to Cape Town, between the Boland and the Stellenbosch Mountains and the Table Mountain ranges. There's this valley that's created naturally, and it's called the Cape Flats. It's kind of flat, sandy area, which is now much more built up and urban. But it's basically been held by mountains on 2, 3 sides. And doesn't matter where you go, you look up and you can see a mountain range. You can orientate yourself. The mountains, Table Mountain is not high enough to get rainfall every season, every year. But I mean, once in a lifetime, it does get snow. But you're always aware in the winter months by looking up and seeing the snow-capped mountains in the Boerland and the Drakensberg. So you feel the cold air coming from the snow-capped mountains. Then in the summers we have the bushfires, and you see how the smoke goes up on the mountain ranges, how they savaged, how you see the flames at night. So there's this entire ecosystem and cosmos and universe supporting you energetically, visually, directionally. And I mean, obviously, the mountain ranges also played such a huge role in kind of the colonization of the Cape and the defense of the Cape. And for a long time, only kind of the Cape Peninsula was populated, and they basically saw anything beyond the Boerland Mountains and the Stellenbosch Mountains as deep Africa. So there was almost this sense of a small like area which was kind of um kind of visually accessible, and anything beyond this small portion that was surrounded by the mountains was visually and kind of mentally inaccessible and not possible to inhabit. So it's this energy of the mountains that I miss when I go anywhere else.
Yes, yes. So, but what's interesting about your experience of, sharing that landscape of the mountains is that you're not on the mountains. You're in the
No.
valley,
Mm.
surrounded by the mountains. And, you and I both know feng shui.
Yes.
And it just reminds me of what's called like the Ming Tang, which is
Mm.
an area where it's also known as the armchair configuration, right? So you kind of
Yes.
have this supportive embrace around you, but
Mm.
in the middle is like the sweet spot. Is that what
Yes.
you would kind of Does that resonate with you, that you kind of
Definitely.
lived in that sweet spot there?
Yes. And it's this because I think when you on top of the mountain, and I mean hike every weekend to the Tygerberg Hill, which is kind of between the two mountain ranges, and the prospect that you get from there is just phenomenal. But it's almost this quiet strength of being held, which is much more profound and it's much more subtle, so it's not this, oh wow, look at this amazing view, or this quick kind of emotion. It's a much more kind of almost like nurturing, quiet, supportive energy that is just there to hold and protect and embrace. And you consciously almost not even aware of it until you don't have it. When you move, like in London, I mean, I kept on looking up, trying to look for Table Mountain, because I mean, South Africa, we were also a British colony. So architecturally, there are lots of connections between the UK and South Africa. So there's a sense of familiarity. But then there's this lack of Africa, the mountains, those protections, so you feel there's this familiarity, but it's just not. And then I found, like, traveling to Seattle, that connection, because Cape Town has also got that special connection between the mountain and the sea. And all of a sudden, that nature of the mountain ranges and the sea, it brings you back home. So you immediately feel a sense of like, this could be a bit of home. Lisbon has the same, with the small mountain with a castle on the mountain and the river. You again get that sense of kind of that protection in the river. And Hobart in Tasmania, they've also got like a small mountain in the river. So it's kind of almost those energetic connections of mountain embracing, and certain extents the water, that kind of just seeps into your being, but on a much more subtle, kind of almost kind of spiritual level than a quick, awe-inspiring, life-changing aspect.
Yes. Oh, that is such that is such an important aspect of our existence and our connection and our interaction with
Yes.
Earth and with our experience of it. So as you have traveled the world, you instinctively identify with those places that have the same kind of pattern language, right, as
Yes.
where you were raised. And I'm wondering, I would imagine that for many of us, we also instinctively connect to places that have that same pattern that we grew
Yes.
up in.
Mm.
Except, I grew up in kind of flat suburbia, Long Island.
Yes.
However, I mean, Long Island has become, excuse me, a really kind of, for the most part, just sprawling suburbia. Doesn't have a lot to connect with and admire. But I have to say that the Atlantic Ocean gives a lot of strength on the South Shore, and we have the Long Island Sound. So there's the water, that the
Yes.
waterfront, that really does help kind of pull us together and keeps us there in a way very different from mountains, though, right?
Yes. Mm. Yes, the energy of the mountains are, I mean, it's that earth, it's that stability, whereas the water is obviously much more flow, ebbs, and all of that. And I think, I mean, just if you're looking at kind of the movement of mountains, it's so slow that nobody can almost visually perceive it. It's over millennia. And whereas you look at the tides, so like the water, which is like with the moon phases, it's the cycle is much, much faster. But even in Miami, which is like really, really flat, and I somehow always thought the Everglades were mountains until I got to Miami, and I was like, what? It's swamps? It sounded as though it had to be this amazing mountain range. And then I was like, these flat swamps and you can't even see them. But living on the canals in Miami, there's also something really, really amazing about those canals. And the movement, and that your neighbor is across the canal, and the prospect across. So even though it's flat, it still has this really lovely connection to nature.
Yes. And, something that I don't explore all that often on this podcast, but really intrigues me is the weather and the climate of specific
Yes.
places. So can you, I know you talked a little bit about that in the beginning about the wildfires. You almost talked about the wildfires with like warmth in your heart. And I'm curious about that because
Yes.
yeah, can you share a
It's
little bit about that?
yeah. So in the Western Cape, we have just the most amazing fauna, which is called fynbos. And it's all the proteas and ericas and all of that. It's a really, really diverse group of floral kingdom. And we've got, I mean, we kind of win the Chelsea flower show every year with all our wonderful flowers as well.
Wow.
So, and for many of the fynbos species, they actually need intense heat, which are those bushfires, to actually open the seeds for them to then germinate and so on. So, the fynbos basically every 5 years, that's their cycle. They actually require a bushfire to be able to propagate further. So it is devastating for the wildlife and especially all the small, slow animals and so on. But there is also new life in terms of the floral kingdom. So, I mean, we've got these two mountain ranges and it is really, really devastating. And I mean, our firefighting services are just phenomenal in terms of fighting the fires and all of that. But there is always this small little glimmer of hope, for the floral kingdom to kind of continue. So yes, it's never just bad. There's good and bad, yin and yang.
I would love a photo or two of those
Oh,
flowers that I can, yeah,
yes,
because
absolutely.
I have never heard of them, and I think
Oh, wow.
listeners would love to hear, love to
Yes.
see what they look like, especially if they've won the Chelsea Flower Show.
Yes, I
Wow.
mean, we're very proud. We've got the botanical gardens in Cape Town, and they also on the slopes of Table Mountain. And many of the hikes you can actually go from the botanical gardens into Table Mountain for hikes, and it is just a phenomenal like environment to be in, and quite different. Not so many trees, more large bushes and so on. But these flowers are just, and I mean, phenomenal. Our national flower is the king protea. So I'll definitely send you a photograph of our national flower.
Wonderful. So, so it's really striking to me, Janine, the work that you do and where you were raised. And can you just share a little bit about your passion for planet, place, and people, and how that connects with your upbringing and where you're from with the land?
Yes, I think it's always difficult. I mean, everyone kind of goes to similar schools and education. So I think having a mother as an art teacher, that already helps. So you're not kind of looking at the conventional. My father did quite a lot of woodwork, so there was always the sense of making and creating and doing things to make your life more beautiful and more pleasurable. And this ability, I mean, I always grew up thinking everyone had an aunt or an uncle who owned a farm, and everyone's father could fix everything. I just thought that that's kind of just generally that's what you are dealt with. A father that can fix everything, you give him a drawing and he makes it for you. And this ability to spend every school holiday on the farm, like being part of like chickens and goats and maize and and shearing sheep and being in the sheep bins with the wool and all of that. And being able to ride horses, to go and fetch sheep and stuff like that. So I think that connection between creating and being so close to nature has always had a profound kind of influence. And again, I think it's a subtle, subconscious thing. It's not a big thing that happens all of a sudden. Um, my uncle was an architect and he just said, don't go and study architecture. But luckily he wasn't my dad, so he couldn't force me. And I must say, in second year it was terrible, and I actually thought of applying to go and study agricultural sciences, to go and become a farm manager, because it was really difficult and it felt disconnected. But then we have this amazing South African architect, Gabriel Fagan, who now passed away a couple of years ago. And we were tasked to go and survey his house and meet him. And when I walked upstairs to go to the bedroom section, I looked up and he had the most amazing undulating ceiling made out of timber. And I just got butterflies on my stomach. And I just knew I can do nothing else with my life. And his house was located in Camps Bay, which is kind of on the western side of Table Mountain. It gets intense heat with the sun sets, but everyone faces due west because of this glorious view over the Atlantic seaboard. And as you arrived at the home, you would see this amazing ocean. And then he would take you down almost like in a tunnel where all the views were stripped away, and you would walk downstairs, down a narrow passage, and all of a sudden everything opened up, and there were these three frames of this Atlantic Ocean. And you just like, wow. So that had a profound impact on me, this kind of taking away and giving again, and again, kind of making what is seen as you're driving along so special by framing it. So that's kind of been like a big kind of impact in terms of really understanding the unique sense of place. After I finished my studies, I moved to Namibia. And as I said, as you cross the border going to Namibia, it's almost that you enter a spiritual realm. And there also, if you go to the north, it's the Okavango swamps are kind of bordering in Botswana. It's the Okavango River. It's this fertile soil. But then you go to the desert and you think nothing grows there, but there's an entire ecosystem and cosmos. So I think I became aware of all these absolutely unique and special environments that almost shape the people who live in them. And because the planet is shaping the people, that then creates these places. So for me, it's almost looking at what nature gives and then what the people are doing and what their cultural beliefs are and their cultural habits, and how those two components then create place. And those two are so unique. And I think that's where you get that sense of belonging, which for me is so important. And that's kind of why these mountain ranges in Cape Town, they kind of, for the first time, when you kind of consciously realize that you haven't got it everywhere, that you have the sense of this is where I belong. And this is kind of what I'm trying to create when I explore and work in Zambia or in the Bahamas or in South Africa. Really kind of what is the planet giving you in terms of kind of energy, natural resources, components, vegetation, fauna, flora, climate, and then what are the people doing in that specific part of the world And then how do you translate that into a sense of place that nurtures you and makes you feel safe, but also deeply human?
Something that you've been mentioning several times throughout this conversation has really intrigued me. And it is this subtle sense that we receive when we're in a space that we feel is 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 like present. It's this like layer of maybe consciousness that's the human element and the land itself that's kind of in a soup together, creating this sense of place, the spirit of place. And when you go to another location, you realize the loss of that, perhaps. Right?
Yes. Yes.
There is a very, very, like you said, a very subtle sensitivity that you feel in a place that's not in your face, it's not loud, yet when it's taken away, you realize what you've lost. And not in a, I don't mean a sense of loss,
Yes,
grief,
not in a
but I
sense of
just mean
grief. Yeah.
it's just that where you just moved doesn't have that sense of place.
Yes.
So I think for many of us, it's so hard to put words to that, right?
Yes. Definitely.
So I so appreciate that you really helped kind of put words to that to the best of your ability.
Yes.
Because we could just be in a place and we can't put our finger on it,
Mm,
but we know that the feeling is different. Perhaps we feel energized or we feel calmed, and we just can't really. I think one
yes.
of the things that I think it was architect Christopher Day.
Alexander. Oh,
Oh,
yes.
yes, there's Christopher Alexander, but Christopher
Yes.
Day, who
Uh-huh.
said, I believe, in Places of the Soul, that book, where he
Yes,
said,
I've got that one.
we don't merely see our environments, we breathe them in.
Yes. Yes. Definitely. And I think it's even more than just breathing it in. It's using all your senses. And for a long time, I've always thought, you know, good design should make people want to be in a space, and they don't necessarily need to articulate why they like that space. But it's a space that they gravitate towards because of the combinations of natural light and views and ventilation and materials that they connect with and all of that. Um, and I think for a long time, I didn't really know how to articulate, you know, and it is also, you kind of need to travel to come home to appreciate what it is you have in your home, you know. And I find traveling so amazing because you get to experience other planets, I almost want to say, and cultures and people and climates and how they deal with things. You know, we've just come back from a 14-day trip to Sri Lanka, and it was just such a almost like spiritual journey to go to these amazing architect designed places, some of them in the wilderness, some of them in urban towns, which have got layers of history, of colonial history, Portuguese, Dutch, British, Civil War, and to see how that is all there to understand and embrace and acknowledge, you know, and that's what's made kind of that country to where it is and how it's dealing with its history. So I think, yeah, I mean, when it gets to the layering of buildings, to not kind of eliminate but to rather consolidate and acknowledge and see what came before and what is good and what should be avoided, you know. Yeah, I think that's kind of what's so amazing about that the third element place, and how that gets shaped by the people from the planet over the decades, and that it's not stagnant.
I was going to ask if you'd be willing to close your eyes and to give us maybe a little bit deeper feeling of your belonging to that land where you live or you were raised around the mountains. Is that something you'd be open?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I would love to kind of feel that experience of belonging to the land that you were on. What comes up for you when you think about that land?
So for me, it's this quiet, centered, grounded energy. That's it's kind of grounded in the space that you're in, this valley, this open place, but it feels not exposed. So it's different to the desert and dunes. It's almost as though it's much more permanent. It's stable. It's rigid in a good sense. It's got this feeling of having been here forever. This almost wisdom, the earth's wisdom that's been there, that's holding one. And the seasons come, whether it's snow, whether it's fire, but the energy is there. So it's almost though the energy, the underlying energy is so deeply rooted in the earth's wisdom that the seasons are almost superficial little tufts going across the mountain ranges that are kind of like a blip in this energy that is just so ancient and wise. Yeah, so and it's almost that kind of all our ancestors have been here, and all future generations will also be held here. And it's a place of belonging and a place of being.
Wow, thank you for that, Janine.
You're welcome.
As you were talking, I was getting this very strong sense of like this deep root from that valley going down into the core of the earth, like pulling the energy down, not directionally, but just as you were saying, that grounded, that
Yes.
strong, that strength of the earth's wisdom holding, just beautiful.
Yes, it's definitely this the sense of being sheltered and held, within that wisdom. Which I think is just, yeah, I mean, one doesn't consciously think of that. But that's definitely the sense that one gets of being held with all this like earth's wisdom and, yeah, millennia of it.
Thank you so much, Janine.
You're welcome.
And I would love to just see if there's anything you'd like to wrap with, anything that you'd like to say before we close.
I think it might be nice for listeners to try and kind of see what natural connections they have within their home, not necessarily seeking the wilderness, but within kind of that urban envelope, and whether there is that connection to water or the mountains or the desert, and kind of whether there is that like kind of almost sense of loss when you leave that place or when you come home. I think it would be interesting to explore that because I think many people are living in urban environments, and obviously it's absolutely terrific to go into nature, but I think it's also so supportive to be consciously aware of this constant connection to nature, even if you're in an apartment or a home beyond your garden space, but kind of looking at the macro scale and how you feel that's kind of supporting you in some or other fashion.
Yes, just beautiful invitation there. I highly agree. That is something that, I mean, we're in the, the landscape that we're in, or the landscapes that we were born into. There's deep meaning for us in that
Yes,
land. And to
yes.
explore that is really a fabulous path. So thank you for opening that to us. I just really enjoyed this conversation, Janine. Just such wonderful, beautiful depth and beauty. Thank you.
No, thank you, Maureen. It's been an honor to be on the show and to share. I really appreciate that.
And I just, for everybody who's watching and listening, please like, share, and comment. We will reply to your comments below. And please subscribe. I would love to hear any thoughts you had on this conversation. So look forward to hearing from you all, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Maureen. Keep well.
Thank you for being a part of the Enchanted Earth podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so that you'll know when we publish another inspiring episode. Check out my book, The Enchanted Earth, available wherever online books are sold. Thank you and have a magical day.